There are so many games releasing. I'm only one person. I can't keep up with all of them. And I curate games all through the year, but making those high quality professional list videos is a huge challenge for me. I'm one person. I don't have an editor. I just put it all together myself. So I have a pile of games, so many games that I want to present to you, but I don't have time to show them off. So today I'm bringing you a whole bunch of 2024 and 2025 survival games in this more casual setting, where I just show you the Steam page and talk about it for a little bit, because I want to show off all of these games, but really editing and putting everything together can take hundreds of hours with the hundreds of games I cover. So, to get things started, survival games from 2024 going into 2025. Soulmask is one that has released into early access to mostly positive user reviews, and this one is sort of this... I mean, all of these are survival games, right? And you can see this one has been getting major updates, and this has a fantasy, spiritual element to it. And it's about this merging of tribal life and survival game. And by the way, I want to clarify on what a survival game is, because initially, way back when, survival games were survival horror games. And survival horror games were like Resident Evil, and that's what we called survival games back in the day. But there was always this sort of hint of survival games where you are actually surviving the environment, but it wasn't really a genre until maybe about 2014 to 2017 when it became a survival game, and then survival horror was established as survival horror, and survival games were open world crafting and building games like Soulmask. So this one does seem pretty interesting, and keep in mind, I don't have time to play every single one of these games. Just look at the time codes below. There's so many games. I'm trying to keep up with everything, and the reviews for this one are generally quite nice, and you can see there's building and hunting and surviving and all of that good stuff. Soulmask seems to be going through things pretty easily, and they are looking at the full version at least 1 year. So 2025 full release for Soulmask, maybe if they stick to their schedule. They rarely do. Next, Pacific Drive. This one is a driving game where you are maintaining this car going through this dangerous survival zone. You're scavenging for resources on your station wagon as a mobile base, and you, well, as it says, drive like hell to try and get through. Look at all this stuff going on here. Scavenging, crafting, maintaining. So this is a survival game. The unique selling point obviously is you're maintaining a car, and there's been a few games that are sort of like this, where you maintain and customize a vehicle, and it's not the only survival vehicle game on this video today, but you can see Pacific Drive has also fully released earlier in the year to over 11,000, almost 12,000 user reviews at very positive, over 80%. So Pacific Drive is one that has been a success in 2024. You can see it looks great. It's got this interesting twist, and they managed to pull off this surreal, semi-horror, sci-fi, but also you got the station wagon kind of vehicle maintenance gameplay as well. So that's kind of cool. Next up, Good Heavens. This one is one that I was sort of looking at through this year. You can see it's releasing, aiming for Q1 2025, but it has a free demo right now. And this one is a 1 to 8 player open world RPG-esque. It's got this sort of hand-drawn, cartoony style to it, which is interesting, but obviously not for everyone. But it does have this sort of throwback to older kind of more casual MMO/survival games, but this one's not an MMO. It's a open world survival crafting RPG thing. You can see there's going to be some inspirations from Don't Starve, obviously, because that's one of the most popular survival games out there. And you can be a wizard, warrior, sorcerer, explorer, artisan, and you're just exploring this world solo or with friends, fighting these things and trying to survive in, you know, this, I mean, it's sort of an interesting take. I mean, the the aesthetic of the game, I think, is really what sets it apart. And it's the kind of art style where if you look at it initially, you might not be into it, but look at it for a little bit longer. There is a free demo, and maybe you'll get into it, because this is the kind of game where maybe once you get into the art style, it feels a lot better, but sometimes at initial glances, it doesn't quite look that great. All right, next is Aloft. Aloft is one that I've been watching for a number of years now. It's supposed to be flying around on these floating islands, building, surviving, crafting, of course, in co-op or solo. But also, this one has been, I think, delayed a number of times. It's now aiming for a January 2025 release window, but there is a free demo now, and people have sort of been playing it a little bit, and it does look a lot better than the initial reveals. I listed Aloft maybe 3 years ago for the first time, and it's been pushed back. It does look so much better than what it looked like back then. So it is coming along, and it's looking good. So there's promise now. It's just taking longer than I think they expected, but all in this new trailer here does look really good. Hopefully it does actually play that well, but you can always try the demo, of course. So January 2025 for this one could be cool. Next, The Last Plague Blight. This one did release into early access to a good handful of user reviews, but they are over 90% positive. So it's going through early access, and this one, The Last Plague Blight, is another one that I've listed before in previous years. And you're surviving in this open world, and there's this mysterious disease that has made people sick. And you can see the visual style is realistic, but I don't know, it's a little dated, a little older looking, but it's got this interesting survival mechanic when the whole thing is sort of built around this disease. But of course, it is an open world survival building crafting experience, and there is co-op modes as well. So it's an interesting one. We've been watching it for a number of years. It is in early access now to good reviews for a handful of them. Then we have Heat Death Survival Train. This is another vehicle survival, but instead of a station wagon, it is a train. I mean, it's pretty much Snowpiercer, right? You're building your survival base on this mobile train, and mobile train bases these days is actually a bit of a trend. This one is releasing on the 12th of December 2024. There is a free demo right now, and I think it's pretty clear whether you'd be into this. If you're into trains and into survival games, then Heat Death Survival Train obviously is one that you might be wanting to get into. You're building and customizing your train, withstanding the elements, basically. And it's also this sci-fi world set in the future, I think it is. And there's hostile drones and other things out to kill you. And I don't know, the train enthusiasts out there have been getting a bit crazy these days with games, and this is another take on a train game and could be cool. Voxlands. Oh, we've been watching this one for a while. I've been waiting for this to release in some form. It says coming soon to early access, and it's a voxel open world survival game where you're building and putting all this stuff together. And obviously it's inspired by Minecraft, but voxels mean the blocks are even smaller. These days anyway. Voxel games, if you don't know, it's a style of generating the world and displaying the world where it uses cubes to make things more granular and allowing you to have the massive scale of things, which is what Minecraft did starting back in 2007, 2008. And basically, the idea is the voxels get smaller and smaller as technology gets better and better, because voxels allow you to do things like destructible environments and collapsing physics, and basically the ultimate goal is for voxels to become an atom in a digital space so that everything is fully simulated. So generally, you can see things are getting smaller on the cubes. You can still see them. It's sort of like 3D pixel art at this point, but the cubes are much smaller than Minecraft. And this one has been hyped and looked at for a long time. And it's just been coming for a long time. And it says it's gonna be an early access for about a year, but this is the kind of game which I see taking much longer in early access. So, yeah. All right, Voyagers of Nera. Well, it's a island, tropical, fantasy-looking survival game for up to 10 players, vibrant ocean, very Moana-esque, and you're tending to your island spirit, building unique villages, and going from island to island. And islands are always a good setting for survival games. We had Sky Islands before, this one is actual islands. But you can see the unique thing that sets this apart is that it's got this water islander mechanic. You are gliding around, surfing around, boating around, and the visual style is actually quite nice. It's leaning towards the cartoony aesthetic, but it's at that point where it's still realistic enough, which I like this art style. You might not, but I do like this art style. It's vibrant enough, colorful enough, but not being too cartoony. So yeah, Voyagers of Nera, tending to the spirit of the island, looks kind of cool, coming Q2 2025 to early access, and they are planning for they always say about 1 year in early access. No point believing them. They won't know either. Once it releases into early access, then you'll know whether they'll need longer in early access or not. Omega Crafter. This one did release into early access to a handful of very positive user reviews, over 80%. This one is an open world game where you're collecting materials, building your town, and crafting weapons and armor to face off against strong enemies. So many games these days have that glider thing going on as well. This one does look a little bit visually older, but it's got some interesting points here. I just had this on my list of curated games where it sort of looks like it could be interesting, and you have these little creatures going around, which, I don't know, it sort of feels like open world survival crafting with Pikmin or something like that, and you go around facing these dungeon bosses. This one doesn't look like it's gonna have mass appeal, but it might be something that's kind of interesting. And just to see, do they say 1 year in early access? At least 1 year. Sure, whatever. Omega Crafter. Rooted. This is one that I have actually listed before and been looking at for a while. It's this sort of realistic survival game in a post-apocalyptic world, which is overgrown and of course full of dangers. Salvaging, building, crafting, hunting, trying to survive alone, or you could team up with friends. And one of the big points here is Unreal Engine, so it looks really good, but also maybe not as unique, because we're sort of trying to see how it all comes together. This is a type of game, like just at first glance, this is a type of game that we've seen many times, just at a glance, right? So it's not super convincing from just looking at the game. This could be something that's kind of interesting, but there's no fixed release window at this point. They are still getting some updates slowly over time. And going through alpha, so maybe we'll see more of this in 2025, and it could be cool, but also it might be just a bit generic. We'll see how that goes. Longvinter. This is one I have talked about. It's been in early access for a couple years at this point, and it's this cutesy looking, you know, Animal Crossing-esque game, but it's a survival game where it's a bit harsher than it initially appears. And this one has, you can see, got mostly positive user reviews, which is floating above 70 to 80% on Steam. And it's, I've heard a lot of conflicting things about this game. There's been reports of griefing, or just bugs, or just it's too hard. You know, I've played Salem the Crafting MMO before, and you know, I'm familiar with the extreme environment, griefing, and all of that. So this one is harsher than it initially appears, so just keep that in mind. But the people who have been playing it have generally been liking it, but it might not be for you. Just keep that in mind. Now, this has been in early access since February 2022, aiming at early access in a year. They're way past that. I don't know why they just say a few years. Don't commit to a year. Just say a few years, or we'll see how it goes. You don't have to say, oh, we'll exit early access in a year. They almost never do. Under a Rock is one that I have seen and listed before. This one does seem quite interesting. It's got that art style that I said that I liked as well. And it's set on this island where you are building a little home base. Is this all cinematic footage here? I mean, some of this is in-engine, but you can see here that another glider. A lot of these survival games, if you put them next to each other, they start to blend together. But this one does look good. You can see you craft armor, fight giant things. Is that Tamatoa? I think there's some. I think that's literally Tamatoa, right? Like what is? That's straight up from Moana. But okay. So you can see these island ones are sort of inspired by Moana, but this one does look nice. It's got that very cartoony but realistic art style. It's got gliders. It's got crafting, and it could be nice. Coming soon to early access. And approximately a year. I can't believe I was hoping it wouldn't say that. Approximately a year. But Under a Rock has shown some promise, and I would like to see where it goes from here. OddFauna, Secret of the Terrabeast, one I have listed before. It's sort of a weird creature thing where you craft, forage, and farm. But it's more fantastical, cartoony, but also weird, you know, where the wild things are kind of vibes. Look at that guy. And it's just sort of part crafting building, but also creature plant crafting building, so it's got some spore elements to it. And it seems to be kind of interesting and setting itself apart, but also it's coming soon to early access, and we have watched this for a while. 1 to 1.5 years in early access, and I was sort of expecting this to enter early access in 2024. It doesn't seem like it's going to be able to do that. It might be coming a bit later on down the line, and then I expect, of course, the early access to last longer than they say it would. Smalland. Smalland finally released. This is basically Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but more fantasy. So there's Grounded, right? Grounded is probably more Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and that's been sort of competing with Smalland, which finally did fully release in 2024, and you can see it's not super mega popular, but it's gotten like almost 6,000 user reviews on Steam to... it's currently floating just over the 80% positive mark, and this one is sort of a more realistic looking, shrunken down survival game. And it's a little bit different and a bit more serious than Grounded. See, in Grounded, you are more kids. And this one, you are more grown-ups. But fantasy races, I think, species. You're like elves and stuff. So this one is you're facing off against all these bugs, trying to survive as you are tiny in this giant's environment. And it's pretty cool. People like it. It's gone well. Sons of the Forest. This one. So The Forest, of course, is one of the biggest survival games of all time. Sons of the Forest, again, one of the biggest survival games of all time. It was going through early access and it was having a bit of a rough time, but it eventually came together and fully released to a lot of very positive user reviews. It's approaching 200,000 user reviews at over 85% positive. So Sons of the Forest, there was a lot of skepticism of whether it was going to work or not, but it eventually did work, because how could you make a sequel to that? Basically, you're stuck on this island and there's some weird experiments, and they're not zombies, but more homunculuses of limbs, which sort of live on this island, and you eventually start to use them to your own advantage. It's somewhat horror, somewhat not survival game, and it's obviously taken off. Ark Survival Ascended. Now, I'm just mentioning this because there's always a new Ark game. Ark 2 is supposedly still on the way. Ark Survival Ascended did release into early access in 2023, still going through early access to mixed reviews, floating around 60%. It's a new Ark game, and I mean, it's a new Ark game. They're saying that they want to fully release by the end of 2024. I don't think they will. Ark is not known for sticking to their schedules, and it's just Ark is just that game where it's a survival game with all the dinosaurs and giant creatures around. Survival Ascended, it's also somewhat sci-fi, and a lot of people have played this, and not everyone has liked it, but I'm mentioning it anyway because it's still going through early access and a lot of people did play it. It might someday be amazing, who knows. Lost Isle, this is one that is aiming for a 2025 release window. And you're building up a settlement and protecting it from monstrous beasts and other players, crafting weapons, equipment, and there's this cosmic power that's going through things. Now, this one looks like it could, like, again, at a glance, it looks a little generic, right? And sometimes when you're looking at these survival games particularly, I've made survival lists for so long, and when you're looking at survival games particularly, sometimes you look at the footage and it's like, this is the most generic game in the world, and then it releases and sells 1 million copies a week. This one, I mean, some clips of these look really nice. Like, visually it looks good. It's got some dungeon crawling, a bit more fantasy, holding a wand there. There's actually a number of games coming out that use wands for magic, and this is something that could turn out to be good, but again, they're aiming for a 2025 release window, and from the looks of the footage, it could go either way. It could be really good or not. Dawn of Defiance. Here you are. First of all, this one did release into early access to just under 80% positive on Steam, and this one is Greek myth inspired. A survival game set in a Greek mythological world is something that is a little bit different. That's not so common, but that doesn't mean it's a good game, but generally people have been enjoying it. It's went into early access relatively recently, and you can see that they are aiming for 2 years in early access. Okay, they're giving a bit more of leeway to how long they're staying in early access. So they're aiming for a 2026 full release for Dawn of Defiance. But this has entered early access, and I've heard some good things about it. People have generally been enjoying it. Visually looks good, and just, I think, a Greek setting for a survival crafting builder is something that sets it apart. So there's not really a lot of competition to this thematically. Gameplay wise, they gotta keep it up with it because they can leverage the Greek trials, the Greek gods, the mythological creatures, and those who are into Greek myths are gonna enjoy that, of course. There's Medusa. Ars Notoria. This one is one that I've more recently come across, and it's a survival action RPG, open world sandbox, and you're hunting down possessed creatures. So this one has a more medieval fantasy sort of approach, surviving through these seasons, recruiting allies, and it's more RPG, not just open world survival crafting, but it's a bit more RPG, and it looks very interesting. Just looking at it, it's like, yeah, okay, you got your usual building, hunting, crafting, all of that stuff, but it's something about it does set it apart vibes wise. But we don't have a clear release window for this one, and it's supposed to be releasing into early access at some point. Now, it does look promising. They are testing multiplayer, and it could be one to watch going into 2025. Argonisos. This is one that I heard about, and nice of them to label these cinematic screenshots, and it's a low poly, also Greek mythology one, so there is a little competition for that Greek mythology one, but this one has a very different visual art style, and it's saying here that it's for 1 to 10 players on a giant map of Greece, 1,600 square kilometers. It's not quite Daggerfall, but it's a big map with lots of fantasy mythological creatures to build your base amongst and to overcome these creatures. Now, the low poly art style could work to its advantage in terms of just getting more stuff on the screen, but it does have a lot of detail despite the low polyness. I mean, but this is a cinematic screenshot, and they say they want to enter early access relatively soon, but it's unclear if they will be doing that. They say there'll be weekly updates once it's in early access, and they're looking at 3 to 9 months in early access, and they want okay, some games just never update what they say here. You can see they want to complete the game within the first semester of 2023. So this one, I think, is still on the way. I'm just not entirely sure if it's going to be sticking to any kind of schedule here. But you can see that they updated the release window here. So that means they are still working on it and they are still managing the page, but with no actual proper gameplay screenshots, no fixed release no update on the approximate down here. This is something that I wouldn't jump into too quickly, but could be interesting. Enshrouded. This one is one that did blow up through 2024. It's still going through early access, and it's a co-op survival game up to 16 players, and you basically go and build up a base in this fantasy world with multiple biomes, and you go out and try and clear these enshrouded locations, which are covered in this dangerous fog and filled with enemies. And you're going out questing for better items, harvesting resources, mining, leveling up, all the good stuff for a survival game. This one did take off, 85% positive and over 50,000 user reviews on Steam. It's one of the more successful survival games, and generally it's just been progressing, getting better. It allows quite flexible terrain manipulation and construction. And also, they are not... Well, no, they said take the game out of early access within a year. Okay, they said the year thing as well. So if they stick to that, it'll be a January 2025 full release. I don't think they have committed to anything specific recently. So Enshrouded is still coming along. People are enjoying it. It has already done well. So it's just one of the better ones going into 2025. Nightingale. This one did actually blow up, but it didn't do too well on release. It sold a lot, got a lot of user reviews, but 65% positive, and they have been working on updates and changing up the game. This one is sort of a steampunky-esque fantasy survival game. Gaslamp fantasy is what they call it. And going through early access, it does seem the more recent reviews are getting better. Now, the recent reviews are very positive at over 80%, but considering it blew up at the start and got 12,000 user reviews at 65%, that's very hard to overcome. This is why when you release into early access, or when you release at the start of anything really, if you do blow up and get a lot of negative reviews, it's very hard to fix that. But first release impressions is very important. So although they would say down here 9 to 12 months in early access, considering the rough release, these things tend to take a bit longer to properly fix themselves up. It is nice to see that Nightingale is fixing itself up, but how long it's going to take to get to the end of that process, it's a little uncertain. V Rising. This is probably one of the biggest survival games of 2024, approaching 100,000 user reviews on Steam, 88% positive. It's a vampire survival game, more of a top-down, isometric-ish kind of perspective, so it's a bit more zoomed out, and it's sort of action-y combat RPG, but you also build up your castle, and you can play with other players, and you're just trying to conquer and exploit the land of the living as this all-powerful vampire. But of course, you start out and you're not all-powerful, you become all-powerful. So it's quite an interesting one, and obviously a big success. It is fully released in 2024, and it's just a good one. Whenever I talk about survival games, someone always mentions V Rising. So there you go. That's V Rising. It's a vampire survival, go drink some blood game. Light No Fire. This is the next game from the developers of No Man's Sky. Hence the title being some nonsensical 3 words. It probably has a meaning, but doesn't matter too much. This is essentially trying to be fantasy No Man's Sky. So instead of going through various planets, you're on one planet, the size of Earth, they are promising. So a full-on Earth-sized planet, which is massive. For a depiction of a planet, this might be one of the biggest representations if they stick to their word. Now, Hello Games, through No Man's Sky, promised a lot. The game released, it didn't deliver all that much. But then since release, it's had updates and updates and updates, all free expansions, just free updates and no extra money, no DLC. No Man's Sky just got more content, more content, more content. And some people still don't like it, but No Man's Sky is one of those redemption stories of a terrible launch, well, overhype, terrible launch, disappointing launch, and then somehow pulls it back and becomes popular and big and delivering on all of their promises. As far as I know, they delivered on all of their promises eventually, years later. Light No Fire may do the same thing. It might release and be terribly disappointing and then become amazing. Or maybe Hello Games has figured out how to launch a game relatively complete. But we'll see how this goes. They are, I think, loosely targeting 2025, but nothing confirmed. So we'll see how this one goes. Grand Emprise 2 Portals Apart. This one is something that I have been watching for a little bit, and it's another magical adventure, floating islands, hang gliding. I mean, it looks like Aloft really, but more portally, more surreal, more time travel in it as well. And you can see it brings you to very different locations, very different environments, and it's a little unclear what this is, really. They've been sort of showing it off a little bit, and it is supposed to be a crafting survival game, but you're going through fantasy, going through sci-fi, going through magic, going through history, lava planets, all these portals, and it looks cool, but it's like a little... I don't exactly know what we're looking at. Like, what is this game? What's a gameplay loop actually gonna feel like? But Grand Emprise 2 is obviously a sequel to Grand Emprise, this time travel survival, which released just a year ago. So this one is mostly positive user reviews, and I guess maybe this was sort of a experiment to see if it worked. I guess it was successful enough because I'm making a sequel now. So Grand Emprise 2 is something that is on the way, and this one is available now, and people seem to mostly like it, 70% on Steam. It's interesting. So if you want to know what Grand Emprise 2 is going to be like, it's probably going to be something like this one. It's just maybe a bit hard to market, and that's why it has limited reach, but the sequel might figure that out. Pathless Woods. This one did enter early access, mostly positive user reviews on Steam. Cozy open world survival, set in a more Chinese-inspired environments, low poly environments, very cute, very charming, and you're gathering resources, planting crops, building your dream home, and defending it from marauders. So it is cozy, it is chill, but there is still some base defense to this, and you can play it with friends. This one has been going through early access through 2024, and they are targeting about 3 years in early access. So they're actually targeting 2027 for a full release for Pathless Woods. So it is available in early access now, and you can jump in now, but if you're waiting for full release, this could be a bit of a wait. So you can keep an eye on it for now if you're not too sure, but it's nice that it is actually relatively well liked on release into early access already. Solarpunk. This is one that I have been keeping an eye on. It's another floating island survival game, which one of these will succeed, I'm sure. This one is a bit more modern looking, and Solarpunk meaning solar powered stuff. The game is just straight up called Solarpunk, and these are technically advanced floating islands, and you can play this solo or with friends, constructing buildings, growing food, crafting gadgets, and getting on airships to explore the different islands. Now, it might feel a bit copy-paste of the other floating island survival games, but I want to remind people at this point what I always say: you can't have the diamond without the rough. You want these games to compete with each other. Yes, they're all stealing ideas from each other. That's how most good games have come about. Games steal ideas from each other, and eventually one is just amazing. One becomes a cult classic. Games are always stealing ideas from each other, and it's just the norm. As long as there's no copyright infringement, there's nothing that's really going wrong. It's better for games to take good ideas than to purposefully avoid bad ideas. Why would you do that? So Solarpunk, aiming for 2025, could be cool. Of the floating island survival games, it might be one of the better ones. It might not. If you like floating islands, you can list them all together by yourself, I guess. Polylithic. This one is a prehistoric survival game, and it sort of reminds me of this old announcement of a survival game that never released called Before, I think, developed by Bill Lowe, I think. And it was a low poly prehistoric survival game that looked really cool. This was like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. And it never released. This one seems inspired by that and actually looks kind of better than what Before was going for. And this has released into early access to a handful of user reviews at like 70% positive, and you know, it might come together over time. It's been in early access for about 1 year. It's supposed to have fully released after about 1 year, but I don't think it will. I don't think they're promising. Yeah, it's still version 0.6.12 of the most recent update, and I know version numbers don't mean you're building up to 1.0, but 0.6 doesn't sound like it's approaching 1.0 in any case. And very few user reviews. It has promise. It looks kind of cool, but I think it's just not quite there yet. Lost Legions. People have been telling me about this one. It's an ancient Roman soldier survival game where you are crafting, building, and fighting, and they're promising a story-rich open-world adventure as you are unearthing secrets of this forgotten time. Up to 3 friends, or solo. So this one is building up and exploring this seemingly mystical world in an ancient Roman setting. Lost Legions probably implying that the legions have been stuck in the... I forgot the actual name for it, the spirit world, but what the ancient Romans thought of. And it seems like you are trapped in what sort of implies real-life Earth, but it's not. And just the theme of ancient Romans, you know, everyone keeps thinking about the Roman Empire. This game will keep you thinking about it. And it could be cool. It could be interesting. And just ancient Rome. I mean, it's always a popular theme. And look at that. Was that a reference? When you walk through the wheat fields, your arm goes out and touches it. I didn't catch that before. That's a reference. Oh, they know their pop culture. So yeah, this one does look like it could be interesting, but also from the footage, you can see it does look rather rough at this point. It's still coming soon. They are updating their weekly dev blogs, so you can keep up with the development and see where it goes from here. Sengoku Dynasty. These Dynasty games, there's just so many of them. like Medieval Dynasty blew up, so they went and made a whole bunch. And there's like Lumberjack Dynasty, Cowboy Dynasty, Sengoku Dynasty. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. This one has been going through early access as well to mostly positive user reviews. Recent reviews are dropping into the mixed range, but it's at 68%. I hate how Steam puts 68 and 69% at mixed, because you can go from 69% this scary yellow orange mixed, but if you go up 1% to 70%, and it'll be like, mostly positive, cool, chill, calm, collected. I hate how it's not a gradient, right? Because so many games are at like 69%, and it's like it costs them so many sales, whereas at 70% they would have sold a lot more, and people just look at the mixed rating and, you know, it means too much, this transition. But I would say Sengoku Dynasty is still doing relatively well. 3,500 user reviews, overall rating at 73%. Want to be in early access for about a year? You missed it. So it's another build-up survival, you know, crafting set in more an Asian setting. It's like Medieval Dynasty, farming, all that stuff. So ever since Medieval Dynasty took off, they want to do everything Dynasty, and this is one of them. Seems like combat here is a bit more combat, but essential idea is the same as all the other Dynasty games. 49er. This is one I've more recently heard about. And it's a survival exploration game set in the Wild West, and it has this more cartoony aesthetic, and you're choosing a role and you're setting out to prove that you can be a legend on the frontier. You're building, mining, battling, alone or with friends. I mean, all of these games have the basic premises of, you know, survival games. So I know it feels very tiring, me saying it's an open world survival crafting game where you're building, collecting resources, and defending against enemies alone or with friends. It sounds like the same game again and again, but hopefully the trailer does help set things apart, because, you know, these things have the fundamentals of the genre, so that's why it's a genre. And 49er does have at least this cowboy setup, which is a little bit different. Now, they are planning to release into early access with up to 2 years in early access. So at this point, I would say they're looking at a 2026 full release window, but we would see an early access release probably in 2025. They could be aiming for 2027 full release if they go into early access in 2025. So 49er could be interesting if you like cowboys. Now, Chinese Frontiers is another building survival game set in an Asian setting, and this one, people have been mentioning it to me, and it looks a little rough at this point, and also here's something I want to talk about and why I've put this here. You see the developer and publisher, it says Solid Games. But if you look down here, they're advertising the Playway collection. So, Playway is a company that publishes and develops a lot of games, and they're not doing anything illegal, but it is a bit sus, right? Because what they do is they have lots of developer and publisher names that essentially are them. And some of their games blow up and are massive successes, very well liked. A lot of their games are, what they do is they create these trailers and they don't actually start developing the game until the trailer game page gets a lot of wish lists. And sometimes they start developing the game, and you know, this one has had a playtest, so it is coming along, but this practice by Playway, like if I click on Solid Games and see where it brings me, and here's this Playway page, and they release so many games, and you can see like Crime Scene Cleaner has overwhelmingly positive user reviews, and this is President Studio and Playway SA. If I click on President Studio, where does it bring me? right? It brings me to the Playway page as well. So President Studio is also Playway. So they just keep putting these names on top of games as developers and publishers, and you can see some become very popular. Thief Simulator 2, I know, is, very popular. When it comes to Chinese frontiers, where it might not be great, it might be amazing. I don't know, it's just, I'm a little bit about how Playway just has so many names, and you can never really tell at first glance that it's actually Playway. But if you scroll down, quite often you'll see they start advertising the Playway collection, or even just advertising other Playway games in the descriptions of their games. Like sometimes they put up a trailer for a game, and then you scroll down and it's just advertising another Playway game, right? They use Steam store pages as advertisements for other games. And I guess that's allowed, but Salt 2 Shores of Gold. This is one that I have been watching for a while. I have listed it before. It's a pirate-ish game, but it's been in early access for over 2 years at this point. And it's sail around the ocean, landing on islands, survival, exploring, crafting, quests, caves, towns, pirates, and secrets. Leveling up skills, crafting, hunting, fishing, looting, decorating your ship. Now, it does have very positive user reviews, over 1,000 user reviews at 86% positive. The handful of most recent reviews are 100% positive, but also it seems to be going through early access slowly. They said, of course, at least a year from early access launch. At least they said at least, because it's been over 2 years and they're still probably nowhere close to releasing. Right? New update on the beta recently, so they are still updating it. It's still coming along. It looks a little cartoony, but generally fine. And I guess if you like pirates and surviving, this could be one, but you can judge from the trailer whether this is one you want to get into. Myth of Empires. It's another one. People have really been mentioning this one to me this year. It fully released in February 2024 to almost 15,000 user reviews at this point at 70% positive. This one is a multiplayer war sandbox kind of game, PvE, PvP, lots of fighting, and it's got this very ancient historical setting, hence the name Myth of Empires. And it seems like it's not super popular right now. Recent reviews less than 50 and at 55% positive. So it sort of blew up earlier in the year, and it is still getting updates and new seasons and things like that, but generally it is not as popular as it was on launch day. And that means if you're going into this game, just check the multiplayer count, the player count, because it might not be how much it would seem, especially for this war sandbox. If you click on Community Hub here, you can see how many are in the game. And actually, that's actually fine. 1,200 players in the game right now, that's actually still generally really good. Over 1,000 players in a multiplayer game means it is still alive. So it just means not too many new players are jumping in, but the older players are still sticking around. And Myth of Empires does seem interesting if you want to survive in a more combative survival game in mythological empires, I guess. Palworld, one of the biggest games of the year. Not the biggest, that's probably Black Myth Wukong, but Palworld, the biggest survival game of the year. Approaching 280,000 user reviews on Steam, 93% positive. It's big. It's going through some legal troubles because this does look like Pokemon with guns, and it's this massive open world, creature collector, you capture creatures, you put them to work. It's part factory management, colony management. You use your pals to fight for you, work for you, sacrifice them for you. You can also kill them and eat them. You can capture humans in this one. I'm not sure if you can eat the humans. But this one did enter early access right at the start of 2024. It is still going through early access. And they did say early access for at least 1 year. I think that's just a standard line that they don't bother changing at this point. So this might get a full release in 2025, but considering the legal troubles they're going through, development is still ongoing. Legal troubles doesn't stop development. But also, we're gonna have to see where Nintendo tries to take Palworld and whether Palworld can fight back or stuff, and we'll see how that goes. That's one element to it. Meanwhile, Palworld does seem to be continuing to progress and develop, and it's still getting patches and updates, and people are generally liking it. You can also just double check how many 12,000 still in the game right now. Plenty of people playing Palworld, so that's still going strong. ENDALOR. This is a medieval dark fantasy survival game. I have listed this before, now aiming for 2025. And it looks kind of interesting. RPG, survival, crafting, 1 to 4 players in a lot of fantasy settings and dungeons to delve into. Looking at the footage, it does look Dark Souls-esque. It does take some points from the Souls games, and you'll see in this battle here, is this the correct trailer? Yeah, in this battle here, there is fighting that's sort of Dark Souls-esque, but it's an open world survival game. So it does feel like it's trying to be survival Dark Souls, but also it does look a little rough. It is going into early access in 2025, so it is planning to spend quite a bit more time in development, 1 to 1.5 years in early access, so probably a 2026 full release, but that's only if they stick to their schedule. Think 2027. ENDALOR might be interesting, but they really have to nail that combat. If they want to be like Dark Souls-esque, they got to nail that combat. And they might do it, but I think they have their work cut out for them. Bellwright. Now, full transparency, Bellwright has sponsored me in the past, so this was #ad in the past. This is not sponsored, it's just part of my lists. And this one did release, and now it does say mostly positive user reviews, over 8,000 user reviews right now, very positive recent ones, so it's floating around 80%. It's still going through early access, and they want to reach full release within the next 3 years, so 4, 5, 6, 7. 2027 is their target for full release for Bellwright. This one did release, and initially, right on launch, it was like mostly negative user reviews. But then within a day, it climbed up to 60%, and within a couple days, it was up to like 70-something%. And it just had a very shaky launch. Buggy translation problems, missing languages, some problems on launch. And it very quickly fixed it. So review scores started to jump back up, and now it does seem to be floating around 80%. 3 years in early access is a long time though, and this one is a sort of medieval survival game where you're commanding some forces and engaging in battles, but of course you're building up these villages and fortifications as well. So it's a survival game, but also a bit of a strategy game, and there's a lot to it, but development is going to change it significantly over time, so you could have a look at it now, but early access for 3 years up until 2027, it's just gonna be changing for a long time, if they actually do keep going through development anyway. Mirthwood. This one just recently released to mostly positive user reviews. It hasn't had a lot of time to prove itself, but there is a free demo. Now, the interesting thing about Mirthwood is the way it looks. I have listed this before, and it's got this sort of 2D painterly style to it, and it's not quite reflected in the key art that they have there, right? Like the art there looks really cool. This looks really cool, but really different. And this one does sort of harken back to that top-down 2D sort of survival game. Obviously, there's going to be some inspirations from Don't Starve, but also it feels like the old cartoony MMOs. I'm trying to think of the names of some. But this one is a medieval fantasy world. You are settling a new homestead, and you can choose how you want to live in this world, farming and trading, or taking the adventurous path. So this one did fully release. It is fully released to 75% positive on Steam, but this is right on release, and it seems to be at least providing something different. It does look different from most of the other survival games on this list. The painterly style is appreciated and could be one that you want to get into. Renown. This one looks pretty insane. This one has been coming along for a while now. They're now targeting 2025 for a release. Unclear whether it'll be early access. They're going through alpha now. And this one is a medieval multiplayer survival game, collecting resources, building, crafting, but then building up to full-on battles and sieges. You can build these massive castles and forge weapons, and eventually you get these soldiers and troops that you can play in multiplayer and engage in these large-scale battles. Now, when it comes to multiplayer and these large-scale battles that they promise, it does sort of rely on having a lot of players. So Renown would be amazing if a lot of people play it. I mean, first, if they deliver on all their promises and it has a large player base. So when it comes to these things, if you're watching this in the future and it has released, check the player count, because sometimes there's games which are amazing if there's thousands of people playing, but if people aren't playing, then it's not amazing anymore. Renown is gonna have to figure that out. This has got to work nicely and play nicely, even if there's a smaller player base, whether they use bots or something. That remains to be seen how they tackle that problem. The altars. This is an interesting one. You are one character, but you clone yourself, well, with alternate versions of yourself-ish, and you're trying to escape from this planet. It's a sci-fi survival game with some interesting takes. You're in these fantastical environments, and you sort of maintain this base that moves around the planet, and everyone is you. So it's got this narrative element, psychological element, and you're actually trying to manage and maintain this base and survive. Like, all of yous are trying to survive, right? And you have to maintain relationships with yourselves, and you have this base here, which is a sort of base management. It's an interesting take on the survival base management genre, and it's a sci-fi setting with a surreal, sort of weird approach. It's an interesting one, and they're now targeting Q1 2025 for a release on this one. And if anything, it's going to be interesting to see how this one turns out. Hopefully it's good, but it's a nice attempt at a new idea anyway. Space Prison. Again, full transparency, Space Prison did sponsor me in the past, so this is #ad in the past. This is not sponsored, but it's part of my survival games list for 2024 and 2025. This one is sort of it's a 2D aesthetic where you are sent to this prison and you need to go through, it's sort of roguelite, where if you die, that's not the end of your sentence. Your consciousness is transported into a new body and you have to continue your sentence. You are sentenced to multiple lifetimes, I think, in this one. So you're going around the space prison, finding resources, crafting things, building up your own cell, and making alliances or enemies with factions. And anytime you want to go from one part of the space prison to another, like from one section, like the communal section, to the kitchen section, you have to go through a little procedural pathway where you encounter enemies and find resources and find rewards and maybe die. It's an interesting turn-based tactical combat system and setup for all of this. It got a handful, a good 150 user reviews on Steam at 86% positive. It's an interesting one worth looking at, but see for yourself. The Planet Crafter. Another amazing blow up for the survival genre in 2024. Overwhelmingly positive user reviews on Steam. Might be the highest rated one on this list today. 40,000 user reviews at 95% positive. The Planet Crafter has fully released. There is also a free demo. This one is very confident of itself. And the whole idea of the Planet Crafter is you're landing on this desolate wasteland of a planet, and you are slowly terraforming the planet with water and resources and atmosphere and plants and animals as you go through the stages of building up an ecosystem. Like, you can't go straight to big animals. You got to start with water, plants, bugs, things like that. And you can see there's lots of resources to harvest. And this one isn't quite like a survival game. Like, this one is it's an inhospitable planet, but there's nothing coming to kill you, right? So you do have to survive, but survival is sort of not the main point of it. And that actually has proven to be just the right amount of pressure for a lot of people to love this game. I mean, people have been jumping onto this game all year, and you can play it solo or in co-op up to 10 players. And yeah, just building up a biosphere on a new planet. It's what a lot of people have enjoyed. ETHUS. This one is a futuristic survival game where you go underground into an underground world, and you're mining for resources to build your customizable outpost. But you're all sort of tied to this dystopian corporate thing, and as you try and survive on this planet, building up your base, there is this story that they're promising where you uncover mysteries and a conspiracy. So this one is a low poly art style, but it's promising deep systemic gameplay, and they're targeting a 2025 release window, but there is a free demo right now, so you can just try ETHUS now. And you can see that it's sort of a top-down view base management. It sort of gives Planet Crafter vibes, but you're not crafting a planet. But going from Planet Crafter to this, there's some vibes which feel similar. But this one is a bit more zoomed out and more story-driven, I think. Hopefully they can deliver on that. The demo has been going. We'll see if the full game does actually fully come together with all the details. Honeycomb: The World Beyond. This one I have been watching for a little bit. They say they're planning for a 2024 end-of-year release. Very possible delayed. This one is another sci-fi survival sandbox where you are crossbreeding plants and animals, gathering resources, crafting items, and conducting experiments. So this one is actually more like Planet Crafter, but you're not terraforming the planet, you're taking what's already living and alive and trying to create new things from that. And it could be good, but also note the developer and publisher is Frozenway, and remember what I said about Playway. When you see names like this, if I click on Frozenway, where does it take me? Frozenway, okay, what games are you dealing with? House Flipper? Wait. Didn't we see House Flipper before? House Flipper, Frozenway. Oh, look, published by Playway, isn't it? Wait, that brings us back to Frozenway? Wait, where does House Flipper take us? This House Flipper DLC shows Playway, but if I click on Playway from House Flipper Dine Out DLC, it brings us to Frozenway. Oh, so not just Playway leads to other companies lead to... Okay, but generally, it's that Playway thing again. So, when it comes to this game, Honeycomb: The World Beyond, it looks interesting, but also I'm just a little sus of the way names developers and stuff. So, I mean, this could be cool, but also you're going up against Planet Crafter. That one seems like a solid choice now. We'll see if this one even sticks to their release window. Occupy Mars, the game. Some people really love this game. It's not the most massive of successes, mostly positive user reviews going through early access since 2023, 70 to 74% positive, and you are basically building up machines and bases on Mars, trying to survive and colonize the red planet. It's going through early access. They say approximately 2 years, so aiming for a 2025 full release. Again, it's Playway, but this is one that has at least released and is playable, and people generally like it, but it's been going for a while now, so maybe it'll hit its release window in 2025, maybe not. But if you want to survive on Mars, it's a good option. Forever Skies. This is one that I did list a long time ago as an upcoming game, and it's still going through early access. And this one is a post-apocalyptic survival game where you're returning to Earth, which has been completely destroyed. And it's toxic, and there's derelict buildings everywhere, and you have your flying high-tech airship base, which you are customizing and upgrading as you scavenge for resources on the destroyed planet. And this one has very positive user reviews overall, with almost 4,000 user reviews at 87% positive, and it is still getting updates and changes going through early access, and they are saying they will finish early access in early 2025, so they're promising a full release in the coming months after approaching 2 years in early access. And they did initially estimate an end of 2024 full release, but it's going to be 2025 now. This one can be done in solo or in 4 players co-op, and generally we've been watching this for a while. Good to see that they are approaching full release. Then we have Abiotic Factor, and is this the actual highest reviewed game on this list? Just about edging it to 96% overwhelmingly positive user reviews. Abiotic Factor, to put it simply, is that it's Half-Life, but you are playing the scientists in the base, that's the scientific facility that's been invaded by alien creatures, with also military personnel coming down to try and control the situation, but you are the scientists surviving in this fallout of a science experiment. And you are going through the science facility, collecting resources, building up sort of a base wherever you like, constructing these structures and tools and workstations. And you can do this solo or in co-op. And also it's got this middle poly art style, which is very popular now, where it looks sort of low res, but it's very intentional, reminiscing to late 90s, early 2000s 3D. But it's higher fidelity than that, but lower fidelity than fully realistic. You can see the pixels, but they're purposeful. But it's not pixel art. It's interesting art style, which I actually really like because I'm an old nostalgic gamer. Abiotic Factor is already a massive success, going through early access through 2024. They are planning for full release in 2025 at some point, and through the updates, they have been adding more to the story. As you play through the game, you uncover more secrets, more story, and in certain parts before this, it has been sort of cutting off where the story just sort of ends because it's not done yet. Over time, they've been adding in the story and more gameplay and more zones and more exploration possibilities and more characters and all sorts of stuff. Generally, vibes-wise, it nails it, and I think that's why it really did take off. Space Trash Scavenger. This is one that I have listed before as well, and it is essentially recently released into early access towards the end of 2023, not recently, and you are flying through space, scavenging for various materials, and just building up your space rig to continue scavenging more stuff from space. It's an interesting one, and it's supposed to have been fully releasing towards the end of 2024, but I don't think it will be. It's still getting updates, like generally now and then, so it's not getting super regular updates, but it is still being updated, and the few hundred user reviews that it has received are just under 90% positive. So For those who like this sort of thing, they have been liking it. I think the trailer does sort of show whether you would like it or not as well. And that's an interesting one that it's more niche, but still on the way. Next up, we've got a medieval one called Middle Ages Peasants and Knights. This one is targeting a 2025 release, and it is set in the 14th century European setting, and you are crafting based on real historical methods. So it's trying to be realistic and particularly sort of more historically accurate. So this one does seem maybe a bit like Medieval Dynasty, but more historically accurate, but also it's got that too good to be true look to it. So this one might be amazing, but you can see the trailer is mostly a cinematic, but there's some in-game footage here and it looks okay. And crafting realistically, that one can go one of two ways. It could be really immersive, or it could get really boring, because when you get to realistic simulators, not just simulation games, but simulators, like really realistic kind of stuff, it does possibly get very grindy and boring because real life is not always all that fun. So Middle Ages Peasants and Knights is one to watch if you like the medieval setting and historical accuracy, but we'll see how that really turns out. Then there's POLYARIS. This one is a single-player survival game, first-person skiing. So you're set in this snowy, frozen wasteland, and you are going through with a gun, shooting things, and you are trying to survive in this snowy, not apocalypse, but it sort of feels like it. You're fighting enemies, finding essential resources, trying to stay alive in a harsh environment while people try and kill you. And this one is looking at a Q1 2025 release for the game. And it looks sort of good. These sort of shooter survival games, I'm actually not quite too sure if they count as a survival game because they're survival, but they're not base building sort of survival games, which most of these are. This one is sort of hunting, surviving in the wilderness, so I would say it counts as a survival game, particularly in this collection of games, but it does sort of start to blur into these first-person shooter action survivals rather than just survival games. And then StarRupture. First-person, open-world, base-building game, crafting, collecting of resources, and this one you can play alone or in a group on an ever-changing planet. It's a sci-fi one with creatures to defeat, I guess, to kill, and you are building up this complex industrial system. So this one does sort of feel a bit like Factorio, or rather Satisfactory, but with more survival elements. So you have to explore this world, extracting resources and managing those resources and creating this industrial production line to basically continue taming this world, right? You're building and thriving, fighting to survive alone or with friends. This one is coming soon, no specific release window, but it is looking at an early access release, and it again says about a year, but we're not going to believe that anymore. StarRupture should be a bit more of a survival-ish kind of game, but also very satisfactory. And there's a lot of games out there that are sort of going in that satisfactory direction. And with Satisfactory fully releasing, we'll have to see if any of these competitors can really keep up. Atomfall. This one I did see announced. It's sort of Fallout, but set in Britain, and it's not Fallout London, but this one is a survival action game. So it's another, I was talking about the shooter survival games, where this might not actually fully count as a survival game. I'd love to hear your opinion on whether this is or isn't a survival game. You are exploring, scavenging, crafting, bartering, and fighting with guns and shooting, and going through this mysterious post-apocalyptic world trying to find answers. And it's very interesting looking, this one. It's got this very nice looking open world. It's got some nice visual storytelling, and it just sort of looks good, like a British Fallout game, but a bit more survival. But how survival is it? It's a bit unclear exactly how this is gonna turn out. It's just set to coming soon right now. Some estimates are saying 2025, but overall, hopefully, this one does turn out nice because it looks great. Look at this trailer. It looks great. It's just, I want it to live up to that. And, you know, after seeing so many games, it's hard to fully believe any trailer. So it says March 2025. It feels like possibly delayed, but maybe. Atomfall looks cool. It's one to watch. Terminator's Survivors. There's been a number of Terminator games recently. The RTS did release 2 relatively positive reviews as well, which was a little unexpected because it was sort of looking a little rough at the start, but it released and people are enjoying it. This one, you are trying to survive in the post-apocalypse of the Terminator universe, and you can do it alone or in co-op, scavenging for resources, building a base of operations, and the Terminators are trying to hunt you down and kill you. So not too much has been shown off of this one so far. This trailer is pretty much a cinematic trailer, so we don't have to believe any of that. And it looks kind of cool, aiming for 2025, but official IPs of like movies and stuff being converted into games, sometimes they're big hits, sometimes they're not, and Terminator has always been a hit or miss, so it might be an interesting one if you're into the Terminator theme. And then Road to Vostok. This is another realistic action shooter survival game, which is not so much the crafting base building survival game, but more the trying to survive out in the wilderness survival game. This one we have been watching for years, you know. It's set between the zones between Finland and Russia. You're surviving, looting, planning, preparing to cross the border zone and enter Vostok, and it's just been really hyped for a long time. It does look like the realistic survival shooter kind of games that we have been having recently, and it might be able to live up to the expectations, but also the hype is pretty big for Road to Vostok, and it's been coming soon for a long time, and they're going into early access, but there is this free demo that you can try right now, so it is coming along. And you can see it's got all the staples of this kind of survival game. Inventory management, trading, scavenging, and just trying to stay alive with a lot of enemies and a big wilderness to make your way through. Road to Vostok, we've been watching it for a while. Hopefully it does actually release from the free demo into early access, whenever that will be. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl. Everyone wants me to talk about this one. It's releasing in November 2024, and Stalker has been one of the most hyped games for a long time. I mean, it looks phenomenal. It looks visually really good, and it is one of these, you know, harsh war zone shooter survival-ish kind of games, just trying to stay alive out here, but with a bit more of a slightly horror aesthetic, with these deadly anomalies, they're calling them, and you find these artifacts and you sort of open up this story as you make your way to the heart of Chernobyl, and things have gone a little bit weird. Quite a bit weird actually in this game. So this has been a long time coming. It having a 2024 release date is actually unbelievable for some people, and it's just hopefully gonna live up to all the expectations. But also, again, people do consider this a survival game. See, these are user tags here of what people generally consider a game, and these often change after a game releases. So for now, people do consider Stalker 2 mostly a survival game, but it is a first-person shooter first, and these first-person shooter survival games tend to be hard for me to categorize, but since we're being a bit more casual today, this is a big name on the way, and maybe you count this as a survival game. Subnautica 2. It's actually kind of hard to believe that this is actually coming. Subnautica is one of the biggest survival games, modern survival games, and it's all about being underwater on this water planet. Now, we don't have too much footage of Subnautica 2. This is a cinematic trailer, but you can see from these screenshots that it's basically a better looking Subnautica. It's a world of water and fish, and you are just trying to survive in this underwater world and building a base underwater, and it's creepy and big and open, and you can craft vehicles, tools, build your base, survive, eat food, hunt, and uncover mysteries and secrets. So 2025 is looking for the early access release, which is probably gonna be a while. They at least say it's hard to predict how long it's gonna last, and they'll say 2 to 3 years. So expect 3 to 4 years, generally speaking. So think 2028 or 2029 for a full release for Subnautica 2, but playable starting in 2025. And then finally, I'm going to be talking about Dune Awakening, targeting 2025. Dune is all the rage since the new films, and it's nice to see the Dune IP come back in force. Dune Awakening is supposed to be an MMO survival game, and for a long time they sort of were unclear on what they meant by MMO, because some people said, oh, ARK is an MMO. You can play with like 24 players or something, or 64 player games being called MMOs. And some people consider those MMOs, some people don't. The whole problem with the term MMO is that everyone has a different line on where they draw massive, right? Some people say 24 players is an MMO. Some people say 64. Some people say 100. Some people say 256. Some people say 500. Some people say 1,000, right? I think at 1,000 it counts as an MMO in everyone's books. But below that, people draw the line everywhere differently. So for Dune Awakening, they did clarify that it is actually going to be an MMO with at least hundreds of players in each section. There's going to be a number of hubs, each for their own purpose. There's going to be like a community hub, an exploration hub, a combat hub, or whatever. And eventually, I think mainly the whole thing is, it's about Dune, right? It's about being in the Dune world, right? That's the main whole point of this. They have shown some gameplay-esque for Dune Awakening, and it seems to be like if you like Dune and you like spice, you should like this one. There's base building, lots of people going around, shooting things, combat, constructing things, buying, trading, selling, all the good stuff of MMOs and survival games are here. I mean, Dune is one of the perfect environments to set a survival game with the lack of water and everything. Get your still suits on, and maybe Dune Awakening is something that's going to be good in the future. Maybe. Anyway, that's my list of survival games for 2024 to 2025. Now, this is more casual compared to my usual high-quality, heavily edited lists, and it's just there's so many games. I've already listed over 400 games in that professional edited manner, and there's still so many games that I haven't mentioned. I've curated them. I have a whole Word document with all the games I collect throughout the years, and it just takes impossible amounts of hours for one person to curate everything, script everything, edit everything, put everything together in a professional package and present it to you. So I figured that if I can't get a full-on proper heavily edited list out, then I should at least just throw one together to get the information to you, because at least then you have the information I've found, even though I don't have the high quality editing. Hopefully I was still able to be concise and clear on everything going through this list. It's a particularly long one, it's a lot of games, and I tried to not waste your time and just give you a quick overview of each one without, going through the whole effort of everything. And I left the trailers and screenshots on screen as well, so you can see the game. But obviously this is much less edited and a much quicker way to get the information out. Let me know if you like it. And if you want to support me, please do buy any game using the GOG referral link down below. Support on Patreon to support directly. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video.